All right. Thank you so much for coming back. Our next speaker is Tiff Hockin, who's a designer at Bloomberg. And also, she used to teach at Parsons. And yeah, welcome.
Hello. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this yeah? Okay. Okay. Right. So as Rune mentioned, I'm a designer at Bloomberg. And I think I'll just start by saying my talk may be slightly less organized than Laurel's, which was really wonderful. But it's chronologically speaking, in terms of my time at Bloomberg, when I started, they were just about to launch a new mobile app or essentially a redesigned version of their old news app. And this was the sort of more or less the state it was in. They were designs that had come from Code and Theory, and they were very much designed as like views. And I think the intention there was that someone would translate them into functional pieces to then be applied to the actual problems. And I think that sort of intermittent process never quite happened. So what that meant was that when I showed up, there was this project I was asked to jump into, and it was like completely chaotic, and it had to ship in like 2 days, and there was no it was like trying to take a brick out of a building, but you couldn't even see the bricks. And so after a period of sort of like 3 to 6 really stressful months where both are simultaneously trying to like figure out what the system could be while also trying to fix the thing that's hemorrhaging users and redesign a core utility. This is essentially what the app looks like today. And it is certainly a project that was really, for me, it was really difficult and like interesting because one, I really like cleaning up messes and organizing things. So this was a really good opportunity to do that. But it was a really big mess, and there was a lot of like political mess involved that I was not prepared for. I think that was like the biggest learning for me. But it was I worked on sort of the foundation of these pieces, and then with the rest of the design team, and then a designer came in from Facebook and kind of took it over from me, and has done a really great job. Um, and it's sort of it's like a bit cliche to talk about these things, but and we're still like 40 something in the rankings. We're a niche news product, but when I started and when that app launched, it was at like 1 star, and now it's at 4.5. So that feels like a huge success. And whatever you want to take these stars for, it just feels like a really cool project to have been a part of. And I learned so much from doing that. And I think the biggest challenge, just sort of like reflecting again and closing the door on that, is the typography itself, and thinking about like how you use typography in a way that is both elegant but also like super utilitarian, because we have not only editorial needs but also data and really complicated charting, and so type needs to be able to function in sort of a legible way but also like a really atomized kind of like unit oriented way. And then after that, I joined this team about a year ago called Beehive, and it was formed as I joined it. And it's three of us, so it's an engineer, a design researcher, and myself. And we are sort of tasked with looking at a specific audience and investigating the needs of those people. So specifically, since for the last like 9 months, we've been focused on the news reading habits of young people, full stop. And that has led us. And the reason being that around Bloomberg, basically, if you ask anyone in the building like a year ago, people will be like, "Yeah, we're sort of like writing for someone who's maybe like in a suit, maybe they're like a white male, and they're probably in their 50s, and they're really successful and make like loads of money." And we're like, "Okay, cool. Well, I don't know that person." Um, so that's sort of like our job is to try and like point to like use the analytics which say that like the majority of our readers are actually somewhere between the range of like 25 and 34, which again I think Google defines these like brackets. Who knows how they break down in a more granular way. Um, so the first challenge was like pointing to that number and being like, well, you're wrong. And then also kind of like finding a way to incorporate like our learnings as well as like other people from the building so that so we're not just like in a room by ourselves like coming up with ideas and applying them, but also like bringing other people along with us. And it like looks and smells a lot like design thinking, and it's sort of like a bit of a contentious term in the design community, and I'm not going to say too much about it, but I will say that if your job is to collaborate with a lot of stakeholders who have never like designed anything and they don't know what like a good idea looks like or how you even come up with one, like it's really useful to have a sort of a process to rely on there. So I think for me, this other like part of my time at Bloomberg has been really educational, um, it, especially because I come from like an art school background, and the Yale MFA program, which is very much oriented around like the designer as author and like individual creator. And I just don't really, the questions being asked at the symposium are like really relevant to me. And I've thought about a lot about them as I have been relating to my time at Bloomberg. Okay, so like stepping back a little bit, I didn't actually study design in undergrad. I was a ceramics major. And I like changed my major a million times, and eventually the chair of the program was like, "No, you can't change again. You have to stay here." And I was like, not that excited about it. But in hindsight, I think a lot of the better lessons I learned come from clay. Um, like as a material, it's just super present. Like you can't ignore it. Like everything you do with clay is about clay, and it's whether you're like embracing the sort of like visceral materiality of it, or you're trying to homogenize all of its qualities, like industrial ceramics and like the toilets that we use and so on. Um, and it just because of how it works, it requires that you be like super quick, but also really patient. So for example, if you like take a really long time in the wheel, your pot's either gonna like dry out and it'll stick to your fingers and like twist off the base or like it'll become waterlogged and totally just collapse altogether. So basically like a sort of inelegant touch at the wrong moment can just like dash your progress. Um, and some people kind of make work about this. So this is a potter from the 1800s, George Orr, and he sort of like embraced all of these like little failures, and has become his style. And if you think about like it doesn't seem like progressive now, but at the time it was like super strange. Not unlike him, he's kind of a weird dude. Um, One of the most so like as a teacher, I also think about this time in my life, and kind of there's like two assignments that really stand out to me as being like super difficult and really interesting in hindsight. And one of them was really like famous and super frustrating assignment is that you were supposed to transform 10 6-pound balls of stoneware into 16-inch cylinders on the potter's wheel. And like, I'm not really sure what that sounds like to everyone, but it's sort of like trying to run 10 miles in one go if you've like never run before. Like some people can do it, but it's basically impossible. It's so difficult. And I think basically the assignment was about getting you to sort of reconcile with the materiality of clay itself and also just the breaking points for you as an individual. Um, it requires a lot of discipline and trial and error, and you're just going to fail a lot, like for a while. Um, and so kind of on that note, like the best functional potters will just concentrate on volume. They just like make a lot of things with the intention that you're probably going to throw a lot of them away. So, at the time it was rumored that we sort of tossed these numbers around at school, like ceramists at Mashiko in Japan would make 100 pots an hour, and then they'd be prepared to throw away like half of them. And you just come to embrace like a sort of crappiness at the beginning because you know that you'll eventually carve out something really refined in the end. And to any sort of seasoned designer, that maybe sounds like iterative design. Um, some of the most interesting conversations that I had in that program were about the human-object interface and the sort of balance between functionalism and utility and craft and formal expression, and like how do you make something that's really beautiful and feels really great in the hand, but also is really nice to use, and if it's not nice to use, like why is that, and what does it kind of make you do? Like does the pot work around you, or do you have to work around the pot? Um, there's sort of, there's a spectrum either way, and I think web design and interactive design is very similar. Um, and then, like clay is basically as old as the earth itself. And one of the things that I always really struggled with was the fact that like not only was I making a lot of bad stuff and like failing a lot, or what felt like failure, like it's not failure, it's progress, but um, then you would like fire it and like talk about it in your critiques, and then like throw it away at the end of the semester because you just like hated it so much. And so there'd just be this like giant dumpster of like really bad student projects, and so it was just always really difficult for me to kind of feel good about that, given that I know that we sort of like archaeologists like define cultures on the pot shards that we find, right? And I just like don't like the idea that someone's gonna find my like crappy pot shards in a million years and be like, oh, interesting, what's happening here? And I feel sort of the same way about like being like an artist or like an individual designer. Like I like to respond to other problems, and like I just want to plug into something that's like more of the moment and like responsive to the world around me. Um, and I guess sometimes by doing that, you end up defining the world as well. But anyway, on this image in particular, basically the bowl is like, okay, so clay is really old, and like the ability to harden it and fire it and turn it into something that we can like use forever. That's the technology, right? And so actually, the bowl is like a really disruptive piece of technology, which is like kind of cool, right? It makes food transportable. Um, so that was sort of, yeah, that's my time at school. And then after school, I like had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew that it was that I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided to go to Amsterdam for 3 months to give myself some time to like maybe answer that question. Um, I actually was just like I didn't do any of the normal things that people think you do in Amsterdam. I I called this woman named Anami on the phone, and I literally cold called her. Like I dialed up her number, and I was like, "Hi, could I'd be interested in having an internship in your gallery." She was like, "Well, I've never had an intern before, but like, why not?" Um, and I love this photo. I found this photo of her on the internet. She kind of looks really severe, but she's just really charming woman. She wears that coat all the time. And she's the kind of person that you can just like see their gears turning. Like every question is she's just like chewing on it, like very publicly. Um, Mostly we just like drank tea and ate sandwiches in the gallery. And then like went around Holland and Belgium and went to studio visits to see all the artists that she represented. And I got to see her use a computer for the first time, which was really wonderful. She like didn't really know what to do with a mouse. Like she just it was just every moment was like such a surprise. And she because like the ceramics world is like full of Luddites. Plus it was like 2006 at the time, so not everybody had computers just yet. Maybe like it seems a little weird, but so she's using the mouse, and she gets to the edge of the table, and she kind of looks around and is like not really sure what to do. And so she kind of just does this. Like she didn't know you could pick it up and like move. I don't know. So like the mouse doesn't really speak for itself, which I thought was interesting. And I ended up spending a lot of time by myself, like a lot of time, which is, you know, interesting when you're like 22, 21, and you don't have like social media or anything. And so I just like um, I decided I like needed a website, and I didn't really. That's it. So I taught myself HTML and CSS. Um, and this is the first website I ever made. And it's still on the internet. It's not that public, but I really like it for a lot of reasons, obviously. But after Holland, I moved back to Minneapolis, and a friend of mine and we like had this idea to start an artist residency. It was like an art and science kind of thing, and we interviewed about 30 people, just to see whether anyone was interested in this idea and like whether we knew what was going on. And everyone was really polite, but basically they were this sort of like the thread of everyone's commentary was like, yeah, that's cool, but like we don't really have like a public place for like discourse around art in Minneapolis. And so we're like, huh, I guess we have to start a newspaper. Um, So I didn't at the time. I didn't really know what design was. Like my teachers would they always asked me to like format their resumes because they didn't know how to use computers, and like I mine looked good, I guess. So um, that was like about as much like design as I'd ever done. And all of the design that I'd seen at Kansas City Art Institute, where I went to school, were like they were like weird, like I don't know, they just look like bad wine and beer bottle labels and like just strange design, probably just super commercial. And I was like, that's not, I don't want to do that. Like whatever that is, I'm not doing it. And that's like all I knew about design. But I happen to have like two more ideas about typography and like what it meant to sort of like have legible reading experiences. Then my friend, we both had the same tools, so I became the designer. Um, and this I'm not gonna show. There's PDFs of this project on here, but we did like it was a printed publication for we did quarterly for like 3 years. We managed to like pay our writers and like take people out. We never paid ourselves, but it was a really great project. And I think in hindsight it would be easy to ask like why didn't she just make it a blog or like an online publication? And again, like it was by the time we started, it was 2007. I think we just like didn't really know. We didn't really know what the internet was for, and like I didn't really have that much of a relationship with it, and didn't really know that it could be used for publishing. Like I think even at that time, the New York Times homepage was still sort of like an image of the front page of the newspaper with some links to like how you find it to subscribe or something. Like it was an awkward time. Um, anyway, but we still needed a web presence, so I made this website, and like the the one cool thing that it did was like click and drag, which I thought was like a real like pro move at the time. Um, and the other thing that I think about with this project, and as well when I think about like design for digital spaces, is space itself. So a lot of decisions, simply just because of the nature of printing and like how a folio gets constructed. Like you have a sheet of paper and there's two sides, and that sheet gets folded in half, which gives you 4 pages, which means that everything operates in increments of four. So if you run over to page 25, then you either have to figure out how to fill out up to 28 or like cut back down to 24. So like space is always on the mind. Whereas like, you don't really think about that when you're making a website or something. Space is a luxury afforded by digital materials. Um, After we folded the paper in 2010, I went to get an MFA at Yale. And it was like, it felt like a Sisyphean task. Like I realized I didn't know anything. I was like, I like barely knew what design was, but I knew that I kind of liked it. Like I liked helping people articulate themselves and like solve problems and like come up with better ideas. Like I really loved the editorial process. Um, so it was really difficult, but I also like learned a lot there. I think the most like inspiring class and the person who like really held it together for me there was Dan Michelson. Um, and there I learned how to, I'd already taught myself like a lot of HTML and CSS, but like there I learned logical programming and PHP, which for me just like opened up a ton of doors and it was really exciting. And that's like all I wanted to do was just make interactive stuff. And then after grad school, the sort of time since, I feel like I had to like unlearn a lot of what I came to understand as like the design process from Yale. Um, and like specifically this sort of like this idea that the designer is supposed to go like work alone behind closed doors and like come up with like the thing at the end and like present it to the client in this sort of like reveal kind of moment. And obviously I'm like oversimplifying. It doesn't really work that way. Everyone kind of does it their own way, right? But this idea of like formal rounds of like buttoned up presentations, it can just like kind of feel like magic, and it puts a lot of pressure on everyone. Like puts a lot of pressure on the designer to have like the right thing, and also on the client to be able to articulate properly like what they like and what they don't like. And I think we've all probably had projects where you think everyone's on board and then you look at the thing like a month later and you're like, I don't recognize that at all. And like that's sort of a process failure, right? Like someone wasn't in alignment around what they're doing, but they didn't know how to say so, and so they just like paid the bills and called it done and then did their own thing afterwards. And um so I guess like like I don't really believe in that way of doing it. And I guess if you can sense, this is a little bit about process as much as it is about materiality. Um, but in a way, I think like your answers are only as good as your questions. Like if that's the situation that you're going to find yourself in. So like I've learned that it's really important to ask a lot of really good questions. And This is obviously like not a conclusive list, but like specifically, like what is it? Like what's it for? And like for who and when? Like what are you going to be doing with it? And like when are you going to be doing that thing? And like is it going to make people's lives better? And like how? And also what is better? Like what does that mean? Um, so basically just like always ask questions and question the question and then question the answer that someone gave you to the question. Like I think, also on the heels of that, there's been a lot of projects where someone says, we want X. And you're like, cool, why do you want X? And they tell you they want X because, they like, someone told them they needed it. But the reason they told them they needed it is that person didn't understand some like crucial problem in the organization, or it's a little abstract. But anyway, so kind of coming back around, last year I saw this tweet and I thought it was kind of dumb, but also kind of great. Basically, like the phone is everything. And since I'm back dealing with news again, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to read and get information on the phone. And another thing that this image says to me is, um, it's sort of, I think behind it is like a little bit of like urgency or like fear around like change. So like, in 2007 when we were starting the newspaper, like everyone was really afraid of the internet, or like specifically 2010 and 2008, like when the recession happened, like a lot of papers folded, and like the conversation was changing around like what does it mean to publish and like get our information. And I think when the telegraph was invented, people had the same questions around news, right? And here we are asking these questions around like what it means to be a designer for the screen. And so I guess to that point, I guess it's just like it's all the same kind of thing. Maybe it just looks a little different. Um, so the team that I'm on, we've been focusing on the phone. So the other segue, it's all about the phone. I like almost don't look at desktop stuff anymore, even. But we did some research that was more like exploratory and open ended, and like, oh, what if we could like develop a totally new app and a new way of getting the news? So some of the things that we were really inspired by were there's supposed to be a video here, but I think I didn't share it correctly, so I'm gonna skip it. Um, but some of the things that we were inspired by were dating apps and lack of attention span and summarization. And plus, we're a really small team and not we don't have a lot of resources. And we're focused on the audience, which is external, but we also have a lot of internal needs. And Bloomberg is I don't work for Business Week. It's not obvious yet. Though outwardly it maybe has like a reputation for being really design forward. Like it's got I was the only designer at the time working on that mobile app, and there's a design team of like two people with like one manager. It's like really, really understaffed. So everything is super lean, and like, how can we do the most with the least? So anyway, we worked out this like summarization tool that would select the five most like information dense sentences and present them for you. And if you're not interested in that piece of news, you swipe it off. And if you are, you can tap to read more. And it's all about kind of like finishing the news. It's maybe designed for like inbox zero folks. And then when you're done, you get like a little snow globe gift. And it's supposed to be also fun. It's a little ridiculous, obviously, but it was fun to make. And there was a change in leadership, and they were like, cool, you're not doing anything with that anymore. And we were like, okay, like back to my ceramics days where you sort of make 90 things and throw them in the garbage, which is fine. Um, Kind of unemotionally. But so context is another really big thing. Based on like what we understand of our readers, like people come from Facebook or Twitter and they're spending maybe like 30 seconds and they're not reading the whole article. And we know that our job is to kind of like keep people informed. Information is really important. And also help people get what they need like more quickly. And there's always this kind of like journalistic integrity question, like, well, if the whole article is what's really important as deemed so by the journalists, like how can you sort of minimize that in some way? And I guess the question that I think is kind of interesting is like, well, if people aren't reading it, like why is that? Like reading is a really linear experience, and I don't think we really engage with things in a really linear way. So Plus, like if you're getting your news in your Facebook feed, like you're going to Facebook to go to Facebook, I guess, and you're not going to read the news. So anyway, it just gets me asking all these questions like, what does it mean to read, and what does it mean to read in this context? And how can I make the reading experience like less linear and more atomized in a way to spark greater curiosity, so that when you do have the time and space, like you can dig deeper. Um, and it's a little cheesy, but this this hand, when I took over some of the design files, there was this little like cursor hand floating around on some of the comps, and I just thought it was like there's just something really awkward about it. It gave me the tingles. Like it sounds kind of weird, but like just looking at it, like just gave me the tingles, and it kind of like makes me feel like I don't know, like I just want to make things that we touch that also touch us, and I feel like this the getting the tingles just by looking at this little thing was interesting to me because it sort of is like this. It's possible to have like a physical connection that with something that's actually quite ephemeral. And then, just on that kind of parting note, thinking back to that like emoji Twitter stream where like the world is changing and it's all about the phone, like I think there's maybe a moment where it's not about the phone or the screen at all, and like what does that mean for what we do? And um, yeah, I think ultimately what I take away from my own experience is just it's really again comes down to like the idea and how you get there, and how you can sort of like be a generalist and just command any situation no matter what it is, right? You have to kind of adapt. Like it doesn't make sense to kind of be stuck in a moment too much, right? Um, anyway, that's all I got. Thanks, guys.